Pompeo.
Wow. Good evening, everyone. My name is John Highbush. I have the honor of being the executive director of the Ronald Reagan Presidential Foundation and Institute. Thank you so much for coming out and joining us tonight. In honor of our men and women in uniform who defend and protect our freedoms around the world, if you would please stand and join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Please be seated. Before we get started, we have a few special guests in the audience I want to make sure we recognize tonight. And I'll start with former Congressman Elton Gallegly and his beautiful wife, Janice. Now, I'm told we have the mayor of Simi Valley, Fred Thomas. Is Fred here this evening? There we go. Fred, thanks for joining us. And Simi Valley Council Member Rocky Rhodes. Rocky, there you are. Good. Thanks for joining us. I want to extend a warm welcome back to our guest speaker tonight, Secretary Mike Pompeo, who was last here in 2021 as part of our Time for Choosing speaker series, which was focused on the future of the Republican Party. Having read all 416 pages of your new book about never giving an inch, Mr. Secretary, it was not lost on me when I read it that you are ready to continue that conversation. He has crafted a great read that I am sure you as the audience are going to enjoy. And in the process, he has offered the Republican Party and our country an America First leadership model for the future. This is an audience that I think knows you well, Mr. Secretary. Most probably they know that you were first in your class at West Point, that you were the first person ever in history to serve as both CIA Director and Secretary of State, America's top spy and America's chief diplomat. They might also know that before you were elected to Congress, you came straight out of the business community. But what I want to make absolutely sure this audience knows is that for just about your entire adult life, you have shared a commitment to advancing the values and vision of Ronald Reagan. And I want to express our gratitude for the way you in particular have helped to uphold the Reagan legacy during your time in Congress, while at Langley at CIA and as Secretary of State. For example, you were with us to unveil a statue of President Reagan at our U.S. Embassy in Berlin, overlooking the Brandenburg Gate, where our 40th president demanded that Mikhail Gorbachev tear down this wall. And more recently, you were with us in Washington, D.C. at the Reagan Institute to launch our Center for Freedom and Democracy, which is helping to renew President Reagan's vision for freedom and democracy around the world. Thank you for your true friendship through the years, Secretary Pompeo. You know, President Reagan once said of his Secretary of State, George Shultz, quote, "America was blessed with a man of exceptional character and qualifications for such a vital position." Well, I am absolutely certain he would say the same of you and your service in the vital positions that you've held, and perhaps the vital position you may well hold in the future. But I will let you tell us if you have one in mind. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the 70th United States Secretary of State and author of the new book, Never Give an Inch, Fighting for the America I Love, Mike Pompeo.
Thank you all.
If you want to say anything to open
that's quite a
things
buildup.
up.
You made me really nervous.
Go
But
ahead.
just one quickly. First of all, this is an incredibly special place for me. You talked about my time as a young lieutenant. I came out in 1986 as a brand new second lieutenant, patrolled the then East German border, and I had Ronald Reagan as my commander-in-chief. I cannot imagine a better boss for a young lieutenant in the United States Army. And so as I sit here tonight and look around, I am literally in awe. I love this place. I love that man. I love what he stood for. And the fact that you all are here tonight just makes it so special for me. So John, thank you for having me here, and thank you all for coming out. We'll have a great time talking about this 416 pages.
Well, thank you, Mr. Secretary. Now, I want to talk about the 3 or 4 years before you became that first lieutenant, second lieutenant, West Point. So every time I read your bio, it always properly, rightly says graduated first in his class at West Point. But I wish I had that in my bio. I mean, that's a big, big deal. How does someone successfully graduate in that spot?
I don't know. It's kind of funny. When I have classmates of mine from the class of 1986 around, and they're sitting at an audience at an event, and I get introduced that way, they just like roll their eyes. Like, dude, that's 40 years ago. Like, do something. Rightly so. West Point it gave me this incredible insight into the way we train leaders in the United States of America, the things that work. And I don't know how I ended up doing that well. I was a good student. I worked hard, and the Lord smiled. Other than that, I have no answer.
Yeah, well, it is a big, big, big deal. You use a term throughout this book, and the moment I read it, I think I know what he means, but I'd like you to explain it to the audience. And it's about being a pipe hitter.
Oh, yeah. So it's a term that I had heard a couple times, but never in the same context. I was a brand new CIA director. I had a chief of staff named Brian Carbaugh, an amazing patriot, 30-plus year CIA officer, now retired. And he was helping me put the team I needed on the field. And I followed Director Brennan, who had a very different vision for the CIA. That's my diplomat coming out to me. That's as polite as I can put it. And so we were rebuilding some of the structure and the people, because these people matter. Everybody who's run any organization knows that the team makes all the difference in the world. And so we're going through names, and we'd brief and talk about it, and I'd say, "What do you think?" He'd go, "Not a pipe hitter." And we'd come to someone, I'd say, "What do you think?" Go, "Oh yeah, she's a pipe hitter. Gotta have her. Get her going." And it was this idea of someone who was prepared to do the right thing for America every day, to speak truth, right? When they think you're wrong, they'll let you know. They weren't going to let anything get in their way of total victory, right? They were gonna fight. If you told them to go climb the mountain, they were damn well going to get to the top of that mountain. And that's what pipe hitters are. We've kind of picked it up along the way. And the blessed thing about our country is we have lots of them, and we need to empower them. And I was able to do that at CIA, find these amazing group of people who helped put us in a place where when the president called for something that was hard and difficult, the agency was prepared to do it.
Yeah. You talk about smarts, but something else which you certainly don't wear it on your sleeve is your faith. You take your faith very seriously, and I get a sense it's ingrained in just about everything you do. Is that right?
Yeah, it is. I get asked all the time, well, how did you separate the fact that you're an evangelical Christian believer and your duty to America? And I never understood the question. And I don't mean that facetiously. I never understood it because it informs the way I think about the world, the way I try, and I fail at this, the way I try to interact with every human being, and how America should think of its place in the world, but it informs our understanding of humanity. And so my role as a Christian believer and my role as a CI director, they dovetail perfectly. There's not conflict there, which the media would have you suggest. And then, I had a chance to live some of it out. By the way, you didn't mention, my wife and I taught 5th grade Sunday school for years. Best preparation to be Secretary of State. Now, if you can, you all know, I can see some of you nodding. You can keep 5th grade boys in their seat for an hour. I mean, my gosh. Chairman Kim's got nothing on them. I had a chance to help advance the cause of religious freedom around the world. It was really important to what we were trying to do. It makes America more safe when countries are free. The CIA had a problem with officers who needed help, and so we built a chaplains corps. Much like for those of you who served in the military, you have chaplains that help soldiers around the world when they have problems. We built a chaplains corps inside the CIA. I fought just about every lawyer there to bring that across the line. And we just made life better for CIA officers and their families who are of faith. Not just Christians, Jews, Muslims, everybody had a chance to be more connected to their discipline, their faith as well. So it's always been an important part of my life, or at least since I've been an adult. And this nation understands, I think people in this nation understand that if we walk away from our history, our Judeo-Christian founding, then there's very little that ties it down and moors it. There's very little bedrock like that, and we need to get back to that.
Yeah, well said. Yeah. All right, so I have some great CIA questions for you.
It's funny you say that. This book was much better before the CIA cleared it.
Okay.
It's still good. You should still buy it for your kids and grandkids, but it was better. Exactly.
There's the CIA version.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. I remember when you visited here as the director of the CIA, and I remember telling you, because there was rumors that you were going to be considered for Secretary of State, and I said, please don't. Not because you wouldn't make a great Secretary of State, you did, but I just knew you were doing so well at the agency, and I thought about, when we stood and pledged allegiance to the flag, and I talked about asking people to do so in honor of our men and women in uniform to protect our freedom. But these dedicated people at the CIA without a uniform put their lives on the line every day, and they do so essentially anonymously.
Yeah.
Tell me, what kind of person does it take to be that kind of person at the CIA?
Yeah, certainly the operational folks, including a very special group of people called SAC. This is essentially the clandestine paramilitary forces of the United States. These are amazing people. A lot of them are veterans themselves, so they'll spend 6-7 years, often special operators in our armed forces, Air Force, Army guys, Marines, Navy folks, and then they come and be part of this team. These are great people who do this very quietly in the dark. There's an advantage to that too. What's the like the best thing about being the CIA director is no media.
Yeah.
It is
Yeah.
it is lovely. But they're great people, and it's not that they don't screw up. It's not that the CIA doesn't make mistakes. They get it wrong. We got it wrong on our watch too. But by and by, these are truly committed patriots, trying every day to get it right. They are, of the organizations I observed in the government, the working level folks at the CIA are the least political people I met. They're more like young soldiers, young enlisted soldiers. Tell me what mountain to go climb, tell me where to go, and I'm gonna go do it. I don't care who the president is, it's not about politics, it's about delivering the information that decision makers need to make world-class decisions. And it was an absolute joy. When the president asked me to be the Secretary of State, I was, of course, humbled and honored, but man, I loved what I was doing.
Yeah, I bet. If the average person watching from the sidelines and politics is playing out and Trump's the president, people, oh my gosh, well, he must have been such a difficult man to work for because of the chaos and the Trump and the tweets and that. But
yes, I've heard that before.
I also think, though, that whether as director of CIA or Secretary of State, there was an advantage in that for you, in that unpredictability can oftentimes play to our advantage. And with you in those roles, I have to imagine that might have helped sometimes.
Yeah, John, it's very true. I actually remember, it reminds me of when I was here as the CIA director. I was on stage with Director Panetta, and Brett Baer, I think, was the moderator, if I remember it right. And Brett asked a question, he asked this differently. He said, how do you survive the tweets? Or something like that. Something like that. And Director Panetta gets this big smile on his face, like, I can't wait to see what he says. And so I leaned in and said, oh, they're enormously helpful. Which there was enough truth that my mother would have approved of that. But your point about the unpredictability was spot on. Just think about the contrast. I would travel as Secretary of State, and the first thing the foreign leader would often ask me is, tell me about your boss. Right? And they didn't know him, that uncertainty. And then I could, of course, fill that in the way that was appropriate, truthfully, but highlight the things that made us and America have leverage in the relationship. Contrast that with our current president. I don't mean this politically, but I mean, he's been in public life for 50 years and everybody knows him. Right? He's been to these countries, these leaders know him. His level of predictability is very, very high. And so they have better read on the things they can do and not do. And with us, there was a lot more uncertainty. Uncertainty. I was the 70th Secretary of State. He was the 45th president. More turnover in my gig than his. I would check my phone every morning. No tweet. Go to work. No, it's true. It's absolutely true. But one more thing about President Trump and working for him. He was a great boss. I had the advantage of I spent lots of time with him when I was the CIA director. He wanted the director to come brief him, which is not typical. I would do the daily brief when normally it's some senior, very capable CIA officers. And by the way, you should know I brought a capable CIA officer with me, so it wasn't just me winging it. I had professional assistants, which was useful. But I got a chance to learn how he absorbed information and watch him in the context of trying to think his way through problems. And we developed a relationship where he gave me the space to do the things I needed. If you watch, I remember there was never any gap between President Trump and me. There were lots of folks who fell down, leaders in the administration who fell down because they allowed the media to drive a wedge between themselves and the president. And I never did. Secretary Baker came to see me when I was in the transition from CIA to state, and he said, young man, if you let there be a distance between you and the president and you travel the world, you're just a dude on vacation. And I remember the exact wording so well, and I never let that happen. As much as Chuck Todd or Andrea Mitchell would try and split us, they Mike, please tell us about this tweet. I just never let that happen. And that gave him confidence in me, and in turn, it allowed me to project what we were trying to do as we tried to deliver good outcomes around the world as well. Yeah.
Bravo, bravo, yeah. Now, I want you to put on your lawyerly hat, although you didn't go to law school.
You know, I never talk about that part of my life.
But in the book, sadly, you and your family, wherever you may go, have to be protected because part of your job as CIA director was you ended up overseeing the killing, frankly, of well over 30 Al-Qaeda terrorists, very bad people. Question for you. What's the law? I presume that these terrorists are considered combatants, and that's how this plays out. Tell me how that works.
Yes, no, there is not an action that even comes close to killing someone that there aren't 100 lawyers looking at, but much to my chagrin, from time to time. It would delay things, but we wanted to always get it right. This is the American ethic and ethos, and we are going to operate inside both American law and the central ideas of international law too, the rules of conflict and armed warfare. And so we would always have lawyers reviewing anything that we did in great detail, especially in my first role, because that's a very quiet thing. That's the right way to do it. We made America safer when we made what are deeply consequential decisions. We also always knew, especially when we were taking actions in complicated places, that bad things happen, mistakes happen. Missiles come off rails, people move in the middle of actions. You have intelligence reporting that turns out to be incomplete or inaccurate. And so there was always enormous precision and caution to make sure that we were getting that right. Of all the things, frankly, there's a lot of things we didn't get right every day. And there's so much I'm proud of, but one of the things that I am most proud of has to do with actually my teams. We took a lot of risk, and I write about risk. There's a couple chapters devoted for how one thinks about risk in the world, and the fact that America has to take more risk to actually save money, lives, and our society. But in spite of all the increased risk I encouraged our team to take, we were blessed. I didn't have a single person under my command killed during my watch. Yeah. It was, we had our fair share of, oh my goodness, moments, but the Lord was smiling. But I also think that we had done the hard work, to your point. We'd done the reviews, both tactical, operational, and legal, to put our team in the best position to execute the mission with the elan that you deserve every day.
Yeah, well said, well said. Tell us about Mossad. I mean, if you go to the movies, you read books, and you just say, oh my gosh, the Israelis got it right. And so, tell me.
It's funny you mentioned that after talking about lawyers. They don't have any. It's you can see I'm a touch envious. So, the very first trip I took as CIA director was to Israel to meet my counterpart, a fellow named Yossi Cohen. We are still dear friends to this day. He was a real spy, unlike me. He'd spent 30 plus years working for Mossad on the ground and had done some amazing things for them. I went to see him because I knew that Israel was our only partner in the Middle East that could help President Trump do the things that, and it's a great story. There was always competition, John, between CIA and Mossad, right? CIA is big and powerful, and we have great movies. And Mossad is a smaller but incredibly capable operating force. And so it was always, we're better. And Yossi and I cut a deal that day. We said, we are not going to let that happen on our watch. We are going to go build out a structure together that when Prime Minister Netanyahu and President Trump ask us to do something really hard to solve the problem with Iran, we're going to be ready to do it. And so we took two teams, we put them together. We read them the Riot Act, saying, this is not about who's better than who. This is about defending the things that matter to our two countries, and we did really good work. To this day, when something blows up in Iran, whoever sees it first calls the other one, and we just laugh and hang up. Yeah, it's fun because we know the Iranians are listening on our phones, and we know that it must drive them crazy. It doesn't even matter if it had anything to do with us. We're trying. Right back at you. Yeah.
I knew this was going to be a great event.
They are an important security partner, Mossad, and frankly, the Israeli security forces, even more broadly, that are really important security partners to keep American lives safe every single day.
Now, I know this story could take an hour. We don't have it. But I just, if there's a way you can, in brief, tell the story about Putin's intel chief. I think this was during your time at CIA, where he ended up telling Putin, "Tank Man saved our ass."
Yes.
This is really quite
a story. By the way,
story.
Great nickname, Tank Man. Going with that. Yes. Yeah. If we end up on a debate stage, I am confident that won't be the nickname President Trump gives me. I don't know what it will be, but that won't be it. So the CIA learned of a terror plot that was going to take place in St. Petersburg. Chechen terrorists, they were going to blow some stuff up. We passed this information to our counterparts in Russia. So they take down the plot. They did the hard work. It was amazing. And the story that's fun about this is I get a call from President Trump, and he says, I can't remember, I was traveling somewhere in the world, and he said, "Mike, you're not going to believe this. I just got off the phone with Vladimir Putin, and he's about to issue a press release thanking you personally." And you will remember what time this is. I thought to myself, I'm going to get impeached too. And it took me a second to remember that the operation, and then I realized what I was saying. Sure enough, it's like 20 minutes later, a press release comes out thanking me personally and the CIA. And what was great about that is we certainly saved Russian lives with the information that we gathered. But we saved American lives almost certainly too. There are always thousands of Americans traveling. I guess not now, but at that time, there were thousands of Americans traveling in St. Petersburg, and these locations would have almost certainly resulted in the death of Americans too.
Wow.
So it was good stuff. Your intelligence collectors doing great work to save Americans all across the world.
Yeah. You know, I was fascinated to read in the book that you inherited a certain set of circumstances as a result of the approach that Obama and his administration took towards CIA and state. You did the job that you did as CIA director and Secretary of State. Now here we are with Biden and his team. And just take JCPOA, for example, the approach to Iran. Is it frustrating to you that, with democracy, we vote, we change administrations, but we are reverse first gear, in, out.
Yeah.
How does that affect America's reputation with our allies and even our enemies?
Yeah, John, that's a good question. And that's a good example. There are other places where there's more continuity, that is from Republican to Democrat and back. There isn't that abrupt 180 change, but a handful of things there certainly are, and the Iran file has been one of those. It drives our counterparts crazy, right? It gives them less confidence that the things that they agree to are durational, that it won't be 4 years or 8 years and then back to the other thing, and you see that impact in that they hedge their bets. So while they may be excited about the way we handled it in the Trump administration, and the Middle East, Gulf states certainly were, other things they probably were less excited about that, and so they don't lean in as hard as we wish they were. Look, it is what it is. It's the way our Constitution was drafted. I love the document, so sign me up. But yes, it has a real impact. And you said it frustrating. It's only frustrating not because they undid something Mike did, but because I'm convinced on most of the things they reversed. You mentioned Iran. I'll give you the other example that just breaks my heart on our southern border.
No.
Right? Like it took us 2.5 years in the Trump administration to get this right. People forget the president's first efforts to build the wall and enforce the rules were thrown out by the Ninth Circuit, your lovely circuit here in California. And so it took us a while to get it right. And in Never Give an Inch, I talk about the fact the president literally said to me one day, I hadn't been the Secretary of State long, he said, Go to Mexico, stop the caravans. Like, and then you have to love him. He turns to the White House lawyer, a great guy named Pat Cipollone. He says, hey, Pat, you go with him. Make sure he doesn't get in trouble. Or something like that. And so it was a whole team. It wasn't just the two of us. And the president gave us the leverage we needed. And you remember, this was dire. This was tough stuff. And so went down, met with President Obrador. Jared Kushner helped too. There were lots of hands in this thing. But we told him, look, you got to fix this. And here's what's going to happen to you if you don't. And we were very clear. And, I'm not sure he knew whether to believe me or not. And I could see it in his face. And his foreign minister, a fellow named Marcelo Ebrard, was sitting there too. One of my favorite socialists. And I do. I love Marcelo. And they couldn't figure out if we were serious because we'd given them 14 days to fix it. And I remember saying to him, Mr. President, if you'd like to talk to the president, I have my cell phone right here. And he's like, no, it's good, Marcelo. And it took us a little more. It took us a couple, 3 weeks. And we got the caravans turned around and created what became Remain in Mexico. And it turned the magnet off. We slowed not only the illegal immigration, which is tragic in its own right, but there was less human trafficking, less fentanyl coming across the border. We've had 80 terrorists, people on the terrorist watch list come across the border in these last 2 years. Something's going to happen bad. I don't know when, but something bad, and the volume is staggering. And we had it right. They undid it, and it breaks my heart because we have an obligation to get that right, and we're less safe as a result of that. So it's not about me and me being frustrated, just I think they've got the wrong end of the stick.
Yeah. I was going to get to exactly this subject, but because we're on it, let's just get into a little bit deeper. I know that, you and I, everybody here is on the sidelines right now, so we watch the Biden administration and the policy or lack thereof when it comes to the southern border.
Yeah.
What in your mind could possibly be their rationale for allowing this to occur?
You're going to ask me to go into President Biden's head.
I know.
Wow. That's mean. I do try to articulate, people who have a different view, I try to understand what they're thinking. And you can often articulate their rationale. I cannot. I literally, on this one, I can't figure out to have what are essentially wide open borders today. I saw another data about 600,000 people who we're not even tracking inside the country. Forget the folks who have an asylum date and they're supposed to come back. This is several 100,000 people that don't even have a date. And when you think about 600,000 people, it's hard to get your head around. 4 million total over these 2 years. Kansas, my home state, 3.3 million people. That's just bad. And I can't, even if you have a vision that says more migration is good, even if this was your logic and thought that was right, to think that you should randomly let the first 4 million takers come in is insane. I know, and so I can't articulate. I don't know. I think there's some that think it's indecent to hold out the greatness of America and deny it to someone else. I think there's some that are sympathetic because these people are often living very difficult lives. But none of those argue for open American borders. In fact, they argue for just the opposite, to make sure that when we set our immigration levels, wherever we all land, that they will in fact have an America that is the place they want to be, and we won't have what will be the end result. When you have wide open borders, civilizations seldom survive.
Yeah.
And it is that serious.
Well, in fact, I mean, there's a quote in your book where, when you and your staff were discussing this, it was almost said facetiously, but I think you meant it, which was, okay, you want to immigrate to the United States, you can get a lawyer and fight for 10 years to go through the process, or learn how to swim across the Rio Grande.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, when I was in Congress, we'd have family members of people who were my constituents, and they'd say, my son married someone, or somebody's trying to get here, and you didn't want to tell them the answer, right? And so we just had it backwards. To come here legally was a decade-long process, and to come here illegally was fraught with risk, but certainly didn't take more than a determined person to come across and keep trying until you get here.
Yeah. My
backwards, fundamentally backwards.
Yeah, I had longer-term concern because before all this occurred, I know there was something like estimated between 10, 15, as many as 20 million people in America that were in the shadows. So now we're adding another 5 million to that number. And at the end of the day, it seems as though they'll never leave. We'll never put people on buses and wave goodbye. So it devalues the concept of citizenship.
Yes, I think that's right. President Reagan understood this too. Remember, he does a big immigration program with the theory being, okay, fair enough, they're here. We will bring them out of the shadows into the regulated, rules-based citizenship, thinking that would in fact stop. And of course, not long after that, turns out right back in the soup again. This is the central tactic that has to be taken is you have to stop and enforce. You have to have a lawful immigration system that is enforced absolutely ruthlessly, because we can then make good decisions about who do we want, when do we want them, what skill sets do we want, a merit-based system that reflects the best traditions of our country.
Yeah. Okay, I'd like to bounce to the other side of the world again for a minute, and this was a tough one for you, for the administration, because of the circumstances, the Khashoggi, his death, the killing of Khashoggi, MBS, Iran, Saudi Arabia, the whole thing. You make the point that, as heinous as that situation might have been, our relationship with Saudi Arabia, there are so many things happening from the standpoint of allies behind the scenes where they are saving America in many ways. And I just want you to talk about the importance of the alliance.
Yeah. So yes, there's been quite a kerfuffle around this issue from the book. And by the way, there was a challenge at the time as well. The Saudis sent folks to the consulate in Turkey and killed Jamal Khashoggi. Cold-blooded murder, terrible. We then had a decision. What do you do in response to that? You should note that, I don't want to be cavalier about it, but this is not uncommon in the world. It's a pretty mean, nasty place. And we concluded that we wanted to punish those who'd actually engaged in this act, and we ultimately I signed the sanctions for 12 or 13 Saudis. But we also knew that our mission set was making sure you all were safe. And as much as we wish for human rights perfection around the world, it's ephemeral. It's a fantasy. And so I went in and recommended clearly to the president. There were Republicans, Democrats screaming, cut off any relationship, don't talk to the Saudis. You should know we have a significant number of our armed forces there, that we have a footprint. So it was going to be a big unwinding. And I said to the president, we should not do that. This is important. The Kingdom of Saudi Arabia matters to the United States. If it gets really ugly in the world, the Saudis will be fighting with us and the Iranians will be trying to kill us. This is a pretty straightforward proposition for us. And so the only time I drafted one tweet in 4 years. And I put this one together. And if you go read it, you can go look it up. It sounds exactly like him. So I captured his voice. And we got it right. Think about so we built a relationship. We built a lot of trust with the Crown Prince, Mohammed bin Salman. I got to know him incredibly well. I was the first person sent to go see him, the first Westerner to go see him after the murder. The press was just unbelievable. There's a famous picture. I'm standing next to him, and it's on the cover of the Washington Post, New York Times, and Wall Street Journal. Same photo above the fold, big picture. And the first note I get is from my wife saying, "Why did you smile?" And I wrote her back and said, "You told me I needed to smile more." And of course, if you knew Susan, she gives me the schmuck look, like, "Yeah, but not then." Like, be smarter, Mike. But the truth is, we then built out a security relationship that was even better than before. They came to have confidence in us. As for Mohammed bin Salman himself, I happen to believe he will prove to be important reformer in the Middle East. If you are a young Saudi female, you should thank your lucky stars that Mohammed bin Salman is going to be the leader of that country. He has moved them forward. It may not be at the pace that we like. They may not be where we want them today, but I think he is truly determined to get it right in Saudi Arabia. And they have the 2 mosques, so it is complicated. The clerical establishment still has a lot of sway there, but man, he is bringing them into modernity in important ways. The converse is President Biden, of course, took the opposite position when he was campaigning and said that the Saudi Arabians were a pariah state. And of course, he then has to go to Saudi Arabia on bent knee. I think that confirms our instincts in the Trump administration to have stayed close with them and tried to make them conform to the things we wanted while benefiting from this incredibly important security relationship. Because when you push away from that, the first thing that will happen is they will become friends with the Chinese Communist Party. And that's what you could begin to see. And that's, it's easy to say punish the Saudis for murdering Jamal Khashoggi, but when you think about who you end up actually hurting, it was you. And we weren't going to let ourselves fall into that trap. As terrible as the murder was, one never condones such a thing. But I think we got that one right, and I hope this administration will come to see it too. Keep pushing them, push every country for better human rights, including our own. Right? We closed down our schools for 2 years and denied kids the ability to learn here in America for 2 years. There's lots of work to do, lots of places. Careful about throwing stones, urge them to be better, and always keep the American people at the center of how you think about security policy. We were relentless about it.
Yeah, well said.
Yeah.
Well said. In just a minute, I want to move to China because of its importance.
I don't know anybody wants to move to China.
Yeah. Well, at least to the topic of
There
China.
you go. All right.
And of course, Russia.
Russia, yes.
But before I do, could you talk briefly about one other monster risk that you took and did so successfully with Soleimani?
Sure. Qasem Soleimani was the number 2 official in Iran. He was the general of their external terror operations called the IRGC, bad guy. He had killed 500 plus Americans, some of whom were my friends in the Gulf War, with improvised explosive devices. He was still at it when we came into office decades later. And so we had been trying to figure out what to do. Previous administrations had wanted to take him from the battlefield too. He was a general. And the answer was, you can't do it. He's popular, so popular in Iran, they will have to respond. It'll be World War III. We began to see the Iranians were, they'd taken down 2 American UAVs traveling in international airspace. They fired missiles into eastern Saudi Arabia, where we had lots of Americans, almost killing Americans. Think of Halliburton, Schlumberger, folks working at a big Saudi industrial energy facility, and we got lucky. And we were about to lose deterrence, which we didn't want to do on Iran. And then fate met. We managed to track his path. He was going to fly on commercial airlines because he couldn't fly a private plane. We'd simply take it out of the sky. He was flying on commercial airlines from Beirut in Lebanon to Damascus in Syria to Baghdad, and we had a plan. And so I went to brief the president. He was that day plotting to kill even more Americans. He was literally headed to Iraq to approve a plan that was going to kill a bunch of our fellow citizens. So I flew to Mar-a-Lago on December 29th of 19, briefed the president. I had Secretary Esper and General Milley with me, and recommended to the president that we end the plot. And he said, great, sounds good, which was something, because the rest of the world thought, boy, this will be World War III. So it was a very bold decision that he made. Easy for a Secretary of State to recommend, hard for the guy who's going to own it, and he did. When I got up to leave, I wanted to remind him, I said, Mr. President, don't forget, we're going to fire a Hellfire missile at an international airport, and we've never done that before. And he looks at me and says, don't F it up. Like, you know, Mr. President, it's not my missile. I'm a diplomat. Right? And the message received. And here's the great thing. This story has a wonderful ending. Your military did not screw it up. They fired a Hellfire missile at a moving vehicle going 60 miles an hour at an international airport and struck within 6 inches of the target, killing only the intended recipient.
There you go.
It's no other military. So three things from the fallout. First of all, no other military in the world could pull that off. So we should be incredibly proud of what we've built and the young men and women who carry it out. Second, the Iranians stopped bothering us for a while. They were in the days before that, on January 1st and 2nd, they were pushing vehicles through our embassy in Baghdad. And I had my officers at terrible risk, and we deterred them. Exactly how Ronald Reagan would have thought about deterrence is what we delivered that day. The last thought, it didn't just deter the Iranians. And when you think about this balloon we've had for this last week, like everybody in the world watches these things. The world watched that too. When we took that strike on Soleimani, knowing that everybody thought it would create World War III, and it didn't. Sadly, there were Americans injured. They responded. The Iranians fired missiles at Al-Assad Air Base. We had some Americans injured. It breaks my heart. But it didn't start World War III. And everyone watched it. Our friends like, oh my gosh, these guys are really different. I want to be with them.
Yeah.
We could see that Chairman Kim in North Korea, Xi Jinping in China, and I am sure Vladimir Putin as well, also said, oh my gosh, they draw a line. They say they're going to do something, and they're actually going to live up to the promises they made. It created deterrence really broadly.
You bet.
So it was a righteous strike, a lawful strike. It's impacted my life. I now have a great security team that keeps us all safe here tonight. No, I mean that. The folks who protect us, me, where I go, are amazing and remarkable men and women, and I thank them for it every day. We joke, they've got this $1 million bounty on my head, which my wife thinks is a little low. There's days she thinks it's too high. By the way, there are days I'm sure she's starting a GoFundMe campaign. Like, honey, you didn't take the trash out. Like, oh, good. Yeah.
Oh, that is great. All right. Okay, so now we will visit the topic of China, and the subtext I have for that is, hey, is that a balloon up there? Okay, you ran CIA for a couple of years. What is this balloon doing over the United States? Is it literally collecting intelligence?
Yeah.
Or what's your assessment of that?
So I'm not in government, so I don't know the details, but I give you my judgment, having seen things that feel like this. 100% certainly it's not a weather balloon, or 99.9. 100% certainly it was intentionally driven over the continental United States, and they were deeply surprised they got to fly it as far as they could, as was I. I don't know what they collected, or maybe the Department of Defense has said they were able to jam it to stop it from collecting. Could be right. I hope that's right. But the second order impact, wholly apart from if they could actually take pictures or collect data from over our military bases, which it flew over, the world saw that. I was with a European former colleague of mine. He was the foreign minister when I was the Secretary of State. And I saw him on Monday, and he walks in the room with me and just goes like this. And he just said, like, we're watching this, and we're watching your no decision being made, and your airspace being violated with clearly a Chinese military intelligence device, and nothing. And so regardless of what it was actually doing, the perception is the antithesis of the Soleimani strike, right? It's the flip side of that. Now the world says, and Xi Jinping says, boy, if you're not going to defend the Aleutian Islands when this thing penetrates your airspace, what's the chance you're actually going to help Taiwan?
Yeah.
Right? So we forget that the tactical piece of this, the collection, is problematic. The geopolitical risk associated with this is really risky. And when you begin to layer that on, an administration that, right, that screwed up the departure from Afghanistan and had 13 Americans killed, we had a president that talked about a minor incursion in Russia being okay, and now a balloon, right? These things accrete over time. They aren't isolated incidents that are separate and independent. They are cumulative.
Yeah.
And boy, it just means that the bad guys are feeling Pretty salty. What's the old Southwest Airlines line? They are feeling free to move about the cabin.
Yeah.
And that's just not, that's the exact opposite of what this place, what President Reagan talked about. It's not about sending the 82nd Airborne everywhere. It is about using America's economy, right? The same way we crushed the Soviet Union with the American economy. It's about using the American economy, American energy, American soft power, and having this big stick, this military behind you that convinces the bad guys to stay in a corner.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned Taiwan, so let's go there. I know a week or two ago, I don't remember how many stars the general had on his epaulets, but he had said, predicted we will be at war with China within 2 years, I think.
Yeah.
Now, whether he's right, it's a year and a half or 3 years or whatever it is. Do you suspect that that's true?
Boy, I hope not. And it's not an independent variable. So the likelihood of that happening depends deeply on how we behave in this 1 year, 2 year period that the general was talking about. If we let the kind of things that happened with the balloon, if we continue to let the Chinese Communist Party infiltrate our universities and schools and research centers, if we let TikTok stay inside our system, if we do nothing when they put a virus across the world and kill 1 million Americans, the list is long. If we continue to appease, then he'll take a swing at it. He will. Xi Jinping is determined to create global hegemony. It's not a secret. He doesn't hide it. The timing is uncertain, but make no mistake about his objective. He wants us to live more like them, and we have to respond in a way that is forceful. It shouldn't be partisan, because this is going to be a long struggle. Right? Getting supply chains out, the fact that we're dependent for our pharmaceuticals on China is just dumb. We are so connected to them in ways. So for 50 years, that's been American policy, right? Since Dr. Kissinger traveled to China in 1972, the policy's been engage more, they'll become more like us. And I know Dr. Kissinger was here. He's way smarter than me. He might have been right in 1972. It might well be. He might even have been right in 1982. But by 2022, no good. Proven false. And so we've got to do it. It's going to be a struggle, but we can do this. And if we do this well, if we demonstrate real resolve, then the probability that general statement about us being at war with them will be greatly decreased. He will see the costs, and he'll say, I'm not going to do that. No meeting between Secretary Blinken and Wang Zhishe is going to stop that. I don't mean that's not about, no meeting between Mike Pompeo and Wang Yi would have done that either. This is about demonstrated willingness to take the risks that are going to protect the things that matter.
Yeah, and if, God forbid, if deterrence doesn't work, if we don't exercise peace through strength, as President Reagan would, et cetera, we have a bit of a problem, right, in that Taiwan, as I recall on the map, is a little bit closer to China than it is to the United States.
It's just a titch, yes.
Yeah,
exactly.
So logistics, this would not be an easy war to prosecute and win, would it?
No, it's very difficult. It's why I am thrilled to see the Japanese stepping up. They're going to triple their defense budget as a percent of GDP. It's their backyard. They are the first people that will suffer. If you just stare at the map, very difficult to attack Taiwan without going through Japanese airspace. And so they will be in the middle of this. You should know we have a treaty guarantee to Japan. If they end up in conflict with China, we are at least contractually obligated to come to Japan's defense as well. So this will get ugly in a hurry. Last thought on this. I know the general was speaking about a kinetic fight. He was speaking about armed conflict. The Chinese Communist Party has been at war with us for at least 40 years as an economic matter. They built their economy on the backs of the American worker. They stole millions of jobs, billions of dollars of intellectual property. If you look at their fighter jets, they look like ours. That is not because we all landed in the same place coincidentally. It's because they stole it. And we've been naive, and we've turned the other cheek because we could make a bunch of money, and we thought they would change their way, and it has proven to be false.
What do you think is their greatest weakness?
Well, you mean Chinese Communist Party's greatest weakness?
Yeah.
The fact that you have one person making all the decisions. He screwed up the COVID thing inside his own country. Cost them, they say they had 1,000 people dead. I'm gonna, anybody gambler now, I'm gonna take the over. It not only cost their economy, but the number's probably closer to millions of Chinese killed. There's no board of directors for Xi Jinping, and when you don't have a board of directors, you end up making unwise decisions. And if we press them, if we confront them, he'll be confronted with harder and harder problems. Over the medium and long run, they've also got challenges. They're not 10 feet tall. We're going to win this thing. But, it takes a long, they have 1.4 billion people, although interestingly, fewer in 2022 than in 2021. So they have begun their decline. No country's ever turned that around. They won't turn it around either. They had a one-child policy for so long. They're about to have demographic decline, and that is tough to figure your way through. And so they got lots of problems. They got debt problems. They got real estate issues. Very complicated. They have 40 million marriageable age males that are unmatched, because when they had the one-child policy, it was all men that were being permitted to live. So it's complicated. Like if you're a 35-year-old Chinese man, it's like, that's tough. So they have them. And the other thing they don't have are friends. And we should remember this. We have all the friends. Sadly, they are now closer friends with the Russians. Indeed, they are providing lots of technology to the Russians in this war in Europe. But it's basically the Chinese, now the Russians, the North Koreans, the Iranians, and maybe the Venezuelans against humanity. And if we do this well, we'll have some 80% of the global GDP on our side of the line, and that doesn't bode well for the Chinese Communist Party's long-term success. And I hope, my prayer is that there will be leaders in China who will go back to a model that looked more like the China of 25 or 30 years ago, where they were still communist, none of that changed, but their desire to dominate the world was different, and they weren't prepared to engage in armed conflict to achieve it. And I hope those inside the country who want that will come into leadership over time, and it will happen if the West gets it right.
All right, let's do like a lightning round on Russia. You're one of the few Americans who's looked eye to eye, spent time with Putin. Who is this guy?
He is a Russian nationalist through and through, right? He said it out loud, right? The greatest tragedy of the 20th century was the dissolution of the Soviet Union. It was funny because when I would be with him, he knew the backstory. He said, "Oh, you patrolled the border in Germany back when I was trying to take Germany." I'm like, yeah, that was me.
Yeah.
He is evil. He doesn't care about humanity, doesn't care about Russian lives, Ukrainian lives, none of that. That's all true. He is also, and I've been criticized for saying this, he's also pretty smart and pretty capable, and we should never underestimate our adversaries. And look, he screwed this first effort up, but he is not about to give up on this dream for greater Russia. And it's not just Ukraine, right? It'll be Moldova next, it'll be the Swedes and the Finns. It's hard for us to understand, right? Because we think, why on earth would he invade? But here? So I'm from Kansas, and I'm pretty sure Kansas is part of America. But if you ask me why, it would take me like, well, it is, right? He believes the same about Europe, all the countries that were part of the Soviet bloc. If you said, why are you attacking? He'd say, well, because they're part of Russia. And it's in their DNA, and it's not just him, it's all the folks around him. Indeed, it is broadly shared through the Russian populace, right? This idea of Russian greatness, greater Russia, exists broadly. And so we shouldn't underestimate his tenacity. He's gonna stay at this until the costs exceed the benefits in his eye, and we're not close yet.
Do you think Ukraine can prevail, and by prevail, I mean get Russia out off of its borders and bring the map back to where it was? Is that militarily possible?
It is. I think it is. It's going to take time, and it's going to take America actually providing them the things that they need. And I know inside my party there are many who think we shouldn't do that. It's somewhat controversial. the cheapest, fastest way to protect America's vital national interests is to provide the Ukrainians the tools that they need. The country had corruption problems of staggering proportions. I spent a fair amount of time with President Zelensky, so we should never underestimate that. We should make sure this stuff gets to where it's supposed to be. But they haven't asked for the 82nd Airborne or a Marine Division. They've just said, provide us the stuff. We should beat the tar out of the Europeans so that they'll do it. It is, in point of fact, their problem first. But we have to get this right. And the quickest way to reduce risk that Putin will use a nuclear weapon or do something even dumber than what he's already done is to bring this thing to a conclusion as fast as we can. And exactly where these lines get drawn, one doesn't know. For our perspective, the goal should be this. We should work to provide them the things they need to do to negotiate a solution, because this will end with a negotiation. These things, wars always do, or nearly always do. It'll end with a negotiated solution, and we should make sure that that negotiated solution is sustainable, so that we don't end up back in the soup again in 2 years or 5 years or 10 years. And we know how to do that. It's achievable. Just as we watch these next months and the Russians continue at this, he's going to conscript more people. He's going to stay at this. And if we decided tomorrow, boy, we've provided $21-23 billion worth of equipment to them so far. If we said, nope, we're done, we're not going to provide any more, it will not be long before he is pushing on NATO borders, and we're right back thinking about even a harder, more complicated problem very quickly. And so from my optic, I wish we would have done more sooner, faster. I think we could have had the chance to bring it to an end more quickly.
I have so many more questions, but we're going to be out of time. So let me just ask you to, as we close this out, Mr. Secretary, what are you most proud of?
Oh my goodness. What am I most proud of? I haven't thought about that much. I guess the easy answer is my son got married. Really happy about that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly. Here I'll tell you from the administration, it's not any particular thing, because history still hasn't written the final word on any of it. The Abraham Accords were a heck of a good deal for us in America. We flipped the script on China. And we did the first step of the 12-step program. Right, the first step is to say I have a problem. So we got there, but the other thing we were able to achieve is we restored the founder's idea of who we are and how we should think about our security and our place in the world. I tell the story in the book of the day I got 3 Americans out of North Korea, 3 hostages back home. It's the quintessential way that we operated. It was 4:30 in the afternoon. I was getting ready to leave. I'd finished my second engagement with Chairman Kim, which was, by the way, that engagement, I broke Dennis Rodman's record for most time with Chairman Kim. So, it's funny. Last night I was watching TV and LeBron broke an NBA record. That's nothing, man. I broke Dennis Rodman's record. I looked at Chairman Kim and said, President and I fully expect that when I leave, there'll be 3 more Americans on my plane than when I arrived. And he kind of wandered around, and I went on my way, and we got him back. We didn't pay a dime. We didn't hand over a terrorist to get them back. We simply exerted the greatness and the exceptional nature of the United States of America and placed a demand on him that he understood we were serious about. And that if you said, but one of the hostages is actually in the front of the book, in his own words, describes coming out of the cell and climbing aboard your white over blue American airplane. I can't even think about it. It brings tears to my eyes. That's what I'm most proud of. I didn't apologize once in 4 years for America. We brought back the understanding of America, and we'd lost that in the 8 years of President Obama. And we brought it back, and if you said, what's you're most proud of, that's probably it.
Neat, very neat, very neat. I know you're considering a run for the president. I would.
Thanks, thank you.
As you can well tell, there's a lot of people in this audience, and I'm sure across America, that hope that you decide to do it. And
there's a bunch who hope I don't do it, too.
But if you do, Godspeed and good luck, Mr. Secretary.
Thank you very much.
And thank you so much.
Thank you all very much. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated as our special guests leave the building.